Wolfenstein 2 The New Colossus has three big problems and they're all interconnected. The story is delightfully crazy at times, but it's far too reliant on overly long cutscenes that total around 25% of the game's runtime. These cutscenes are wonderfully acted, but they regularly overstay their welcome. The New Colossus has the crazy WTF moments that you'd expect from a franchise that famously had you fight against Mecha Hitler in the 1990s, but the major plot beats repeat moments from the New Order and are even repetitive within this game itself. There's a huge chunk of unnecessary content in both gameplay and cutscenes, which suggests that substantial changes were made to the story during development, perhaps with a goal to making a more cohesive trilogy instead of focusing on this game as a standalone product. The story helps create the second major problem by taking us to locations with level design and environments that are less interesting than those in the New Order, leading to this big sequel feeling less interesting than the game it's supposedly building on. You spend far too much time in grey rubble or industrial corridors. The colour palette is so dark and muddy it's like watching a DC superhero movie while wearing 3 sets of 3D glasses. The most vibrant level in the game doesn't have any combat, and the second brightest ends up being a dream sequence. Finally, the gameplay is at odds with the level design. Nearly all of your abilities encourage an all-out action focus, and that's far and away how the New Colossus is most fun to play. It's therefore baffling that Machine Games decided to constantly nudge you towards stealth gameplay while forgetting to give you stealth mechanics to use. Levels are cramped and seem designed to slow you down at every opportunity lest you end up having too much fun. I never reviewed the New Order, so as a quick summary, I'll say that I enjoyed it. I thought it was a solid 4 out of 5 with plenty of potential for a sequel. Ironically, for a game about an alternate view of history, there was some rewriting of history in 2017 with regards to the New Order. I get that the political climate in 2017 was unusual to say the least. However, you'd think the New Order was the first game to ever let you shoot Nazis, judging by all the many think pieces that popped up online in the run-up to the release of the New Colossus. I don't want to sound too arrogant, but I enjoyed shooting digital Nazis all the way back in the early 90s. I didn't realise I was so ahead of the times. The consensus now seems to be that the New Order was criminally underrated and a fantastic game. I don't agree with that. The New Order has an 80 on Metacritic, and that feels about right to me. At the time of writing this script, the New Colossus has a Metacritic score of 87, and I really wish I could agree with that one. Alas, I'm really disappointed with the New Colossus, and I'm giving it 3 stars out of 5. The spoiler-free written review is on my website if you'd rather read that instead. There's a link in the description. As a reminder, a 3 out of 5 means the game is mediocre. It might be fun for die-hard fans of the genre, but it doesn't warrant a recommendation. It's okay. That said, the nature of critiques and videos like this is that I tend to focus on the negatives, so I'll be bashing the game a lot. Just keep in mind that I don't think the New Colossus is a bad game. I just don't think it's a good one either. I'm not going to walk through the story in as much detail as I usually do, however I do want to provide a really high level overview of the story to help put the rest of the discussion into context. The first 3 chapters focus on escaping from Frau Engel in a continuation of the story from New Order. There are then 4 chapters in Manhattan where you recruit a resistance group. There's then a couple of chapters in Roswell which consist of a short time above ground before you go into an underground base, and then BJ makes a quick trip back to his family home. There's a chapter in a courthouse, and then BJ is decapitated. We then recruit a second resistance base which requires another chapter in Manhattan and then 4 in New Orleans. You then spend 3 chapters on Venus attempting to get a password and finish the game off by attacking Frau Engel's airship. It's a relatively mediocre story punctuated by some extraordinary events. 2 incredible things happen in the New Colossus. About halfway through the game, Frau Engel decapitates BJ in front of a huge crowd of Nazis. The Crisal Circle uses a drone to collect BJ's head before it falls into the flames, and then they oxygenate the brain to save his life. The head is attached to a new body and BJ is back, better than ever. As if that weren't crazy enough, BJ later disguises himself as an actor and travels to Venus to audition in front of Adolf Hitler for the part of BJ in a Nazi propaganda movie. I simply don't have the imagination to come up with plot beats like this. The writers are either geniuses or insane, I'm not sure which, possibly both. However, despite crazy moments like this, the story in the New Colossus is fairly boring. With the exception of the events I just described, huge parts of the game lack any imagination whatsoever. At the end of the New Order, BJ ordered his team to nuke Death's Head's castle even though he was trapped inside. At the start of the New Colossus, a cutscene shows Anna saving him just in time. However, BJ is in a bad way and spends 5 months in a coma. This 5-month time lapse seems like a perfectly good story excuse to put some space between the events of the 2 games. And yet when BJ comes out of the coma, it's like no time has passed at all. Frau Engel attacks the Crisal Circle's U-boat and BJ has to fight his way through Nazis while confined to a wheelchair. You're only in the wheelchair for one chapter, but the first 3 chapters take place entirely on this U-boat. This isn't even a new setting because we played a level on the U-boat in the New Order. If Machine Games really wanted to show BJ fighting Nazis in a wheelchair, then it would have made much more sense to have that take place immediately after the escape from Death's Head's castle. Instead, we're supposed to believe that a bunch of Nazis holed up on the boat for 5 months, communicating their location to Engel, all the while never being spotted by any of the team who were living there. Apparently the Nazis were living in a section of the ship that Anya, Set and company couldn't find because despite having the blueprints marking the location of Section F on the boat, they gave up the hunt because there was a bookcase covering one of the doors. I have to wonder whether this part of the game changed during the course of development because it seems like such a strange decision otherwise. I'm struggling to find a good reason for the 5-month delay other than to show that it took BJ a long time to recover. After the first chapter, Frau Engel captures BJ and Caroline plus either Fergus or Wyatt depending on who you chose to save in the first game. You make this choice at the beginning of this game though. If you can't remember who you chose or didn't play the first game, then I recommend saving Fergus. He's the more entertaining character in my opinion. You're essentially choosing between a sweary Scot with an artificial arm or an American who hallucinates a lot after accidentally taking LSD. Frau Engel executes Caroline and is about to kill Fergus/Wyatt when Sigrun, Engel's daughter, steps in and stops her. BJ puts on Caroline's suit so he can walk from now on. He can equip more armour but his health stays at 50%. This introduction on the sub lasts way too long. You spend hours fighting in a bland and cramped environment and you don't accomplish anything other than escaping the clutches of Frau Engel. However, believe it or not, this slow start isn't the story's biggest problem. There's plenty more tedium in the rest of the game. After escaping Engel, the crew set out to fulfill Caroline's ambition of freeing the US from the clutches of the Nazis. To do this, they decide to recruit a bunch of resistance fighters working out of the Empire State Building, which is pretty much the only thing left standing after the Nazis nuked New York. The resistance fighters, led by a woman called Grace, are a bunch of communications experts who have a lead on the location of a load of the Nazi leadership. They're worth having on board. By itself, there's nothing wrong with that as an early game mission. The problem comes a touch later. At about the midpoint of the game, BJ is caught by Frau Engel, decapitated, and his head is placed on a new body. Don't worry, I'll be coming back to this scene later. After this epic moment, the group gathers together to decide what to do next. The solution? Go to New Orleans to recruit another resistance group. When combined with the earlier New York missions, a good 50% of the new Colossus consists of recruiting other resistance groups to fight alongside you for the final part of the story. Except at the end of the game you go to Venus. By yourself. Far too often the new Colossus sets up an interesting premise and then completely fails to do anything interesting with it. This is best illustrated with the chapter just before you recruit the second resistance group. Instead of going straight to New Orleans, you have to go back to New York to steal important information to help break into New Orleans. At least we're told it's important, I'm not too sure why. If I had to guess, this level was originally part of the first New York sequence, but the developers felt we were spending far too long in one location, so decided to move it to later in the game. As Grace points out before the New York mission, New Orleans is a ghetto surrounded by a huge wall built by the Nazis to keep people inside. The Nazis filled the city with what they considered to be undesirables, largely LGBT people and ethnic minorities, and they've started killing everyone in a huge purge. Don't worry about that though, because we're only here to recruit another resistance group who happen to be holed up in New Orleans. Likewise, the courthouse shootout ends abruptly with the reveal that it was all a dream, and a visit to Roswell where we see Americans cheering on their Nazi rulers soon ends up with BJ underground in a dark factory. By the end of the game you have control of the Osmerza, which will probably be the base of operations for the next game. This is a copy of what happened in the New Order where you attacked a Nazi vehicle and then used it as your base. At the end of the new Colossus you're in much the same position as you were at the end of the New Order, except now you have an air-based vehicle instead of a water-based one, a bigger team of people working with you, and Frau Engel is dead. We'll get to that a bit later. Anything even remotely interesting in the story happens in cutscenes or scenes in which you can only move the camera slightly. There's hardly any story development during gameplay at all. For example, one chapter ends with you escaping New Orleans with the second resistance group, and the next starts with you on Venus auditioning in front of Adolf Hitler for a movie role. Between cutscenes, talking to crew on the boat, and auditioning for Hitler, I went an hour without a gun in my hands. That's indefensible in a Wolfenstein game. There's a similarly jarring event at the end of the game when after defeating a few tough machines on top of the airship, you're suddenly warped to the set of a live television show to execute Frau Engel. 1 second Grace says, "Are you ready to start a revolution?" and the next you're taking over a television studio. The studio must be close because they see Engel on television while on board the ship and then get to the studio while she is still on air. You can wait here for ages and listen to Engel talking to Carver about her daughter and insulting Carver for his inability to speak German. Eventually the dialogue starts looping. Engel's a pretty bad shot, so you can easily run towards her, cut off her arm and slam a hatchet into her head on live television. The effect is somewhat ruined by the short but annoying load screen that slows down the transition. The new Colossus also has an annoying habit of giving you control for about a second before snatching it away again after what is effectively a QuickTime event. Two of these happen in the cutscenes featuring BJ's father, where you try to hit him as a kid and then do the same thing but more effectively as an adult. This also happens in the middle of the scene in the diner that was heavily featured in marketing materials and during the Hitler audition. These moments are likely here to break up long cutscenes, but that just serves to illustrate the problem. The cutscenes are too long. If anything, these short breaks only add to the frustration and make the break from the gameplay feel longer. Nowhere in either the cutscenes or the levels themselves do we get a good sense for how the US is dealing with the Nazi invasion. New York is largely empty due to radiation. New Orleans is likewise deserted. We're told it's full of undesirables, but we don't see them. The only time we really see a large group of Americans is during the Roswell level, where Americans are dressed in white robes and cheering on a Nazi parade. This begs the question, does the US want to be saved? I'm not drawing any parallels here to the real world in the present day, I'm simply talking about in this alternate history where Nazis have taken over America. What is BJ fighting for? So far it appears that there are a handful of resistance groups who haven't made much progress, and that's about it. The Nazis are clearly persecuting minorities, but what about the majority? What does the majority want? Are most people living in fear of their Nazi leaders, or are they content with the new status quo? We don't know. The Ku Klux Klan members seem enthusiastic about Nazi rule with the exception of the need to learn German. One woman is seen being so eager to please the Nazis that she accidentally insults Hitler and gets herself in trouble. The Manhattan levels include some collectibles that flesh out events during the war and how the Nazis came to the US in the first place. However, there's shockingly little information about life under Nazi rule. Maybe the ambiguity is the point. Perhaps the third game will reveal that BJ and the Resistance are in fact not fighting for the majority of Americans after all. If the story in the new Colossus were better, I might be prepared to give the developers the benefit of the doubt. However, as it stands, the emptiness of the levels and the general lack of world building feels like a careless omission rather than a deliberate choice.
I'm also not a fan of the way BJ and co use nuclear bombs. They set off 2 bombs in heavily populated areas, one in Roswell and one in New Orleans. In both cases there's a quick one-liner where someone says they will make sure to escort innocent people out of the city, but we all know that isn't happening in time. I don't think Machine Games understands how nukes work. You can't just run out of the city 10 minutes before the bomb goes off and miss the blast. We obviously aren't supposed to think too much about this, but I have to wonder if it's worth it. And do we really need 2 nukes to go off in the same game? The attempts to make the player think the city will be emptied in time fall flat, and we know these lines are just there to make us feel better so we can enjoy the explosions without stressing out about the collateral damage. It reminds me of the scene in Batman vs Superman where there's a throwaway reference to Gotham being deserted because it's after 5 and so people have left work. I've lived in big cities, they don't just empty after 5 PM.
There's also a really stupid scene where Spesh visits BJ in prison as his lawyer. Spesh outlines a plan that is clearly not going to work. He tells BJ that he's going to stab a Nazi guard with a knife that he smuggled in, and then the rest of the crew will create a distraction while they escape. I thought I knew what was going to happen here. Clearly this isn't the actual plan. There's no way that the best this group could come up with was a vague plan to have a lawyer sneak in a knife, which he'd never be allowed to do, kill the Nazi guard, which he'd never managed to do, break BJ out, which he'd never be able to do, and escape with BJ while the rest of the group creates a distraction, which, okay, that bit might work. That's obviously not actually the plan. The Nazis would have detected the knife when Spesh walked in, and they're obviously listening in on this conversation. The real plan is presumably to lure the Nazis into a false sense of security and then spring the actual plan into motion. I watched as the pretend plan played out. Spesh was messing around with a knife and talking about aliens as if he was about to stab a Nazi guard. I expected a large vehicle to burst through the wall or a bomb to go off. Nope. Spesh was shot and killed as Frau Engel walked in, revealing that the Nazis knew of the plan and were just playing along with it. That was the actual plan. It wasn't a bluff. I guess this twist, or lack thereof, at least subverts expectations, but that isn't always a good thing. For example, pretty much every major reveal in Lost. Remember, this group later come up with a plan to catch BJ's decapitated head with a drone, transfer it to their boat and then quickly oxygenate the brain before it dies. This group is both genius and stupid at the same time. This scene serves only to kill off Spesh, there's no other point to it.
The entire trip to Venus is based on a flimsy premise and is only in the game as an attempt to one-up the visit to the moon in the New Order. You go to Venus to get the password to Odin, a security system that protects Yos Mirza. You spend a few chapters up on Venus to get the security password, which ends up being Valhalla. Valhalla is the large hall that Odin presided over. In other words, this is like using White House as the password for a security system called POTUS. Even I've upgraded my usual password to be a little more secure than what it used to be. I mean, at least stick some capital letters, numbers and symbols in there. Hardly top-notch security for such an important system.
Normally you're about as secure as a Hyman in a South London comprehensive.
Yep, well done. That's offensive on a number of levels in a very concise way.
BJ disguised himself as an actor and went all the way to Venus by himself without any weapons to get an obvious password for an airship that was back on Earth. I got annoyed the other day when I made a special trip to Costco only to find out it had already closed. I can't imagine how annoyed BJ feels after this trip. While on the topic of Venus, I might as well discuss the most memorable scene in the entire game. BJ's audition with Hitler goes on far too long, but it's undeniably brilliant nonetheless. Hitler is sick. He's a mental and physical wreck, stumbling all over the place and at one point casually peeing on the floor. With less convincing voice acting and direction, this could easily have come across as slapstick or a cheap attempt to make Hitler look pathetic. However, it's acted so perfectly that it's simultaneously funny and believable.
I loved him, Mr. Hitler. Super good.
Mr. Hitler, wenn Sie mich ansprechen, sagen Sie mein Führer. Verstanden? Haben Sie keinen Respekt vor Autorität? Ihre Worte gewähren Einblick in einen höchst verräterischen Geist.
I am so sorry, mein Führer.
Sind Sie denn ein Idiot?
No, mein Führer.
Sind Sie ein verkleideter Schurke, ein Jude? Ein verräterischer Jude?
No, mein Führer. I'm from Arizona.
In the real world, Hitler was almost certainly on drugs shortly before his death, a lot of them. Had the war continued, he would almost certainly have become a drug-addled wreck if he wasn't already. It's also not hard to believe that he would have become increasingly paranoid and disturbed enough to think he needed to run the show from another planet. You can kill Hitler here, although you're executed immediately afterwards. Totally worth it. One of the actors is almost certainly Ronald Reagan. We know that his name is Ronald because we can read the audition list on the desk. The last name is conveniently smudged and not readable, but we do see a small part of it on his chair. Hitler executes Reagan for not addressing him correctly. BJ can also be killed if he fails to correctly read the lines when auditioning.
So many German innocent lives you have killed, but the German race will rise again!
Shit.
I will muffin your ripe peach too.
Ach, widerlich. Absolut widerlich. Sie haben offensichtlich keine Ahnung, wer dieser Mann ist.
So yeah, this scene is excellent. I don't want to undersell it. For me, this scene is more memorable than the scene where BJ is decapitated and his head is placed onto another body. I think that says a lot by itself. The Hitler scene is also entirely in the game as sequel bait. We're clearly getting Mecha Hitler in the next game, and that's great. It's a shame Hitler couldn't have been worked into the story a little more naturally, but I can live with it. There's no need for this scene in the new Colossus, but it's entertaining enough that I don't care. On the less acceptable end of sequel bait is the cube that Spesh shows BJ in the Roswell hideout. The cube is important enough for Spesh to bring it with him when he leaves Roswell, despite the supposed urgency of trying to evacuate the town before the atomic bomb goes off. Set then spends a lot of time staring at it and talking about how interesting it is while never even hinting at what the hell it does. We get it, the cube is going to be important in the next game. Save it for the next game. I love it when sequels are hinted at, but I much prefer it when those hints are subtle. Ideally, they're small background clues in the environment that you only notice if you're being really careful or if you're going back to the game after having played the sequel. When it's shoved in your face like this, it just feels tacky. Spesh goes on huge rants about aliens when it has little to do with this game. This scene in Spesh's hideout would have been much better and shorter had there been no discussion of aliens. The alien stuff could have been left on the wall to hint at what's to come. Maybe the cube could have been found randomly in Spesh's possessions on the boat after he died. Max House could have even been playing with it as a toy until its meaning became clear in the next game. I suppose I should mention the decapitation scene briefly because it's not every day your player character gets decapitated and has his head reattached to another body. It's a decent scene with the one nitpick that Set states that they need to get oxygen to BJ's brain within 7 seconds, but it takes more than double that before the oxygen is hooked up. If you're going to give a specific and short time frame like that, then at least make it accurate. Am I the only one who starts a mental countdown when people give time limits like this? It wouldn't matter so much if it was 500 seconds or something like that, but if I hear a character say 7 seconds, then you can be damn sure I'm going to do a mental count. It's why the song 21 Seconds drives me crazy. Just before the decapitation, there's the courtroom dream sequence. I can't decide if putting a dream sequence in just before the decapitation is a great or terrible idea. On the one hand, having the dream sequence happen immediately before the decapitation means there's no way the decapitation can also be a dream. Except the idea of a dream sequence was put into your head immediately before. So you're torn between kind of knowing it's not a dream because that would be terrible storytelling, but also having dream sequences front and centre of your mind. On balance, I guess it's fine, although I'm not sure why the courtroom sequence had to be a dream at all. It could have worked with BJ just being caught at the end. Perhaps he escaped the courtroom only to find out the courtroom is on an island and there's no escape. Other subplots are underdeveloped and ultimately pointless. If you choose Fergus, you get to see the story of his mechanical arm, which seems to operate with a mind of its own, trying to kill himself and others. There's no resolution to this, it's just a thing that happens and that's it. Is there a problem with the wiring in the arm? Is it a psychological issue for Fergus? Who the hell knows? Strangely, Fergus is at one point able to detach the hand and control it with an incredible amount of precision as it kills a Nazi for him. This could be resolved in a sequel, but given that Fergus is an optional character, I can't imagine it will be a huge part of the game. I liked Sigrun, the daughter of Frau Engel, but again the story felt a little light. Grace constantly accuses her of being a Nazi and occasionally mentions that she shouldn't be allowed in discussions. It never seemed all that likely that Sigrun would end up betraying them, given that she had already gone against her own mum, and sure enough, Sigrun gets her a moment at the end where she scolds Grace and cements her place on the team. That's great, but I wish the story had played with our expectations a bit. If Grace really thinks Sigrun is a Nazi, then why the hell is she allowed to be anywhere near meetings? It'd be cool if Grace found Sigrun in compromising positions that suggested she was going to betray them. We should be made to wonder whether the argument between Sigrun and Engel was fake to get Sigrun into the team circle. With a few subtle hints, the player could be made to doubt Sigrun, but that never happens. It's not a huge issue, but it feels like a missed opportunity. One part of the story I really enjoyed was the stuff surrounding BJ's father, Rip, which was told in part through flashbacks to BJ's childhood and collectibles littered around his house before you meet him again as an adult. Rip is a racist piece of shit. He beats BJ for the crime of hanging out with a black child and then makes BJ shoot his dog. You can miss the shot if you like, but the dad will finish off the dog anyway. Many of these scenes are a little heavy-handed and they didn't do a lot for me until BJ goes back to his childhood home halfway through the game. By reading the collectibles scattered around and talking to Rip, we learn that Rip sold out his own wife, BJ's mother, to the Nazis in exchange for a large piece of farmland. Despite marrying a Jewish woman, he seemingly hates Jews as much as he hates black people. Given the themes of the game, this could easily have been left at that with no further commentary, however there's much more to it. Rip's father-in-law gave Rip a large sum of money for Rip to set up a business of his own, but Rip failed. He blamed everyone but himself and refused to take advice from his Jewish father-in-law. The scene where BJ visits the house has a slow walking simulator vibe to it, however if you take the opportunity to soak in all the information strewn around, you'll build up the backstory to one of the most interesting characters in the game. Side quests could have fleshed out the characters a bit, but they're confined to the U-boat and might just be some of the worst side quests I've ever seen. One requires you to deliver a love letter on behalf of Fergus because apparently BJ is a bloody postman now. Worst of all, Demont asks you to deal with a ratty trapped in the supply room. You move to the room next door and interact with a box. That's it. BJ sets the rat free. I'm assuming this is supposed to be a joke or maybe a dig at other side quests, but it doesn't make this any less a waste of time. Other side quests have you showing off your special powers by charging through crates to open up a blocked door or climbing around shelves to turn off traps. Just before the final chapter, the game's pacing comes to a crashing halt as you're asked to go and find Fergus or Wyatt to bring some sort of resolution to their stories. You talk to a few people and then watch an overly long cutscene before being allowed to bring the story to a conclusion. I'd rather this quest was earlier in the game or just completely optional. Finally, we have BJ himself. In cutscenes, he's okay, I suppose. He isn't exactly a talker, but he comes across as normal enough if utterly dull. During gameplay, however, he talks to himself in a way that feels completely disconnected from both the character and the game. While you're blasting your way through Nazis, BJ rambles on about how incredible Caroline was and how he wants to live up to the high standards she set, as if she were the one dual-wielding machine guns and throwing hatchets into Nazi skulls. He suddenly becomes a deep-thinking poet, and it doesn't feel right. He also constantly thinks about the big secret he's keeping from Anya, the woman he loves and is carrying his twin children. The big secret is that he's dying. His body is a wreck, and he won't last more than a few weeks. I'm fairly sure Anya would know that already. BJ was in a coma for 5 months, and while I'm sure doctor-patient confidentiality is important, I have a feeling Set would have told Anya about BJ's health. There's zero tension behind the big moment where BJ finally tells Anya he's dying. BJ's constant inner monologues about his vulnerable health and how incredible Caroline was start to get annoying after the first couple of references.
Caroline, I released the Eva's hammer, and I'm heading back to our people. I hate to ask. Will you stick around? So I can keep your wings a little.
Speaking of Anya, she's about 8 months pregnant with twins and therefore has a pretty good reason for staying on the boat. Despite this, there are a few scenes where she goes into battle and rolls around in a way that I'm fairly sure is physically impossible, not to mention irresponsible. Again, I know this is a game where a decapitated head is transplanted onto another body, and BJ goes to Venus to audition for a role in Hitler's propaganda movie. However, stuff like a woman who's about to give birth to twins taking part in crazy action sequences feels like a step too far. I'm sure that can and will be attributed to sexism on my part, but it just feels odd and doesn't serve much story purpose anyway. That said, I did enjoy the moment where Anya tells BJ that combat makes her horny while the entire team is listening in over the radio. She's a good character so long as you ignore the fact that she killed her unborn children about 6 times during the game.
Don't know if this is normal, but I think the pregnancy is making me a little, excited. Oh God, is everyone listening in on this frequency? Yes.
Yes. Back sauce.
The only reason I could abide the story at all was because it was phenomenally acted throughout. There are a couple of incredible moments such as the decapitation scene and the Hitler audition. However, so much of the story is mundane that those 2 moments are the only parts that justify their crazy long cutscenes.
The comedy's a bit hit and miss as well. There's an over-reliance on literal toilet humour which is designed to break up the tension, but ends up spoiling serious moments. However, there are some genuinely laugh-out-loud bits too.
This is a map to show you where the traps are. Put them to good use for the
I was disappointed with the flimsy excuses that served as motivation to move from place to place, but I was even more disappointed with the locations themselves, so let's segue into discussion about the environments and level design.
With all the crazy stuff that goes on in the new Colossus, you'd expect some amazing locations in which to fight Nazis. Not so. You spend 3 chapters in a submarine, which is a maze of narrow corridors and engine rooms as you'd expect. A trip to Venus should be exciting, and yet much of your time there looks similar to being on the sub. You spend a brief bit of time outside on the planet, except you're not really on the planet at all. You're just on a bunch of metal platforms. There is no point going to Venus either for story reasons or as an excuse for fun environments. It's simply done to check a box because the New Order had a moon level. More than half of the game is set in Manhattan and New Orleans, and they are both drab concrete jungles. In Manhattan you spend most of your time climbing up stairways in collapsed buildings, and New Orleans is much the same except you're briefly treated to some daylight. There are story reasons for why both Manhattan and New Orleans are in disarray. Manhattan was nuked and New Orleans was turned into a large prison. However, these feel like excuses to keep the levels boring. Why do we have to visit these particular locations? I don't believe that story surrounding New Orleans was so important it took precedence over creating interesting levels. It's far more likely that the story serves as an excuse with bland looking environments. I'll discuss gameplay more later, but while we're talking about the levels, it's worth noting how all these confined environments contribute to frustrating gameplay. In many sections you're tasked with taking out commanders before they can call in reinforcements. If they set off the alarm, then enemies keep pouring into the area until you can kill the commanders, which stops the alarm. In other words, enemies keep spawning in. I tried to locate these spawn points, however I couldn't ever see enemies spawning in front of me. That's okay. It's like when you call your horse in Witcher 3 or Assassin's Creed Origins. The horse is designed to appear off-screen from wherever you happen to be looking at the time. As gamers, we all know this is a huge fudge, but we accept it because it's convenient. In the new Colossus, you have to accept that enemies constantly spawn in out of sight, which often means that sections you think you've cleared out suddenly have enemies in them. You can be backtracking to grab a health kit or restock on ammo when you get hit in the back by an enemy you couldn't have possibly missed before. If the levels were more open, this wouldn't be such a big deal, but the maze of corridors and metal makes it tricky to spot enemies dressed head to toe in black. While I'm on the subject of the maze-like levels, it's worth mentioning how bloody abysmal the waypoint markers are. For most of the game, you're given very little indication for where to go next. This is typically only a minor annoyance because the linear structure means you usually just need to push forward. However, it has moments where it becomes infuriating. For starters, there are objectives to complete on the U-boat between missions, which often come with no guidance as to where you have to go. The boat isn't huge, so eventually you find your destination, but the lack of a map marker is unnecessary. What could be the reason for not telling you where to go to start the next mission? This happens within the missions as well. The waypoint marker is tiny and usually doesn't appear on the map. It only pops up on the screen if you happen to be looking directly at it, which somewhat negates the point. On one level I had absolutely no clue where I was supposed to go. It wasn't a huge space, but I went back and forth and died a few times as I wondered whether I was supposed to make some ambitious jumps. The exit turned out to be above me in what looked like an otherwise unremarkable pod, which you can reach via a beam that looked like it was behind an invisible wall, as much of the environment is. There's no reason why this couldn't have been clearer and marked on the map. The best environment in the new Colossus is Roswell, and yet all it does is highlight how lacking the other environments are. You probably saw Roswell in the trailers. It's a bright, beautiful and horrifying glimpse at a part of Nazi-occupied America that is not a ruined city. BJ travels to Roswell with a bomb hidden in a fire extinguisher. You can walk around for a bit and eventually you go to a diner to meet with Spesh. This felt like a huge turning point in the game. I was finally going to tear shit up in a town that has Americans wandering around in KKK outfits. There's an awkward conversation in the diner with a Nazi. He's about to leave when he sees your face on a poster and realises who you are. There's a brief QuickTime event and then you head into Spesh's hideout where he gives a speech about aliens. The main part of the level proceeds to take place in an underground facility that looks just as grey and metallic as everything else. Spesh has a secret path into this area and no one notices the huge empty hole in the top secret base.
The first piece of DLC reuses a lot of the assets from this area and lets you shoot stuff in daylight for once, but this should have been in the main game.
Throughout my time with the new Colossus, I constantly craved open space to fight in, or even an indoor space that was big enough to run around in and stretch my digital legs. This hardly ever happens, and it's a huge disappointment after Doom 2016's large open areas to fight in, which helped disguise the otherwise repetitive nature of the levels. In Doom you would turn a corner to find a large combat arena. In Wolfenstein 2 you turn a corner to find another corner. After Roswell, BJ briefly stops by Mesquite, Texas to visit his family home. Instead of a huge shootout in the open space around the home, the fight is restricted to the house itself. Admittedly, the house is being held in mid-air at the time, but it's still loads of narrow corridors. The last major level does at least offer something new. Even though much of this level is also narrow and restrictive, it's vibrant and ends with a fight on top of the ship which has a refreshing amount of space. BJ can actually run around, it's great. The new Colossus looks a lot better than the New Order. I initially thought the improvement wasn't all that noticeable, but going back to the previous game you can really spot the difference. The new Colossus is clearer without the grainy filter that covered the screen in the New Order. Despite that, the New Order provides far more memorable environments. In the New Order we started by assaulting Death's Head Castle, which was more visually interesting than an underground factory. We also visited London, fought our way out of a hospital, walked on the surface of the moon and spent a couple of chapters in a concentration camp. I went back to the New Order to capture footage, but I remembered all these levels anyway, even though it's been 3 years since I played it. My memory is terrible, so that goes to show how good these levels were. I've just finished 2 playthroughs of the new Colossus and going through the footage I'm already struggling to quickly distinguish between Manhattan and New Orleans. I will barely remember these levels in 3 months, let alone 3 years. The story in the New Order was a huge globe-trotting spectacle, whereas the new Colossus focused on liberating America. There's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of variety and exciting spectacle in the US. Just sticking to obvious locations, couldn't we have travelled to Los Angeles or San Francisco? Or maybe the Nazis could have captured Miami and turned it into an important port that we needed to blow up. Or the Nazis could have set up a base in the vast chunks of farmland in the Midwest. Anything that would have been more interesting than crumbled buildings and metallic interiors. The levels are littered with collectibles, but I had no motivation to collect them. They're tucked away in dingy corners of dingy levels. I was already bored of the environment, so having to poke around the extremities held little appeal. Even worse, you can rarely see the collectibles. You'll often notice the indicator pop up on screen, but not the item itself, because it's just another grey item in amongst plenty of other grey items.
At roughly the midway point, I got my hopes up and thought that perhaps the levels were about to become more interesting.
When BJ gets the upgrade suit after being decapitated, you're offered one of the 3 contraptions as a bonus to be affixed to the suit. The Battle Walker is a set of stilts to reach higher places, the ramshackles let you burst through thin walls and hit enemies while sprinting, and the Constrictor harness shrinks BJ to let him crawl through tiny vents. You only get given one, although you can find the other 2 as you play through subsequent levels. The contraptions offer passive bonuses such as overcharged health not counting down until you start taking damage. You'd be forgiven for thinking that these suit upgrades would open up the levels a bit and offer opportunity for exploration. That's not the case. Bethesda has been known to share resources between its numerous developers, and I'm fairly sure this is where Arcane, the developers of Prey, chipped in to help out a bit. The suit upgrade choices are very much in the Prey mould of not really being at all interesting. In case you haven't played it or watched my video on the game, in Prey, if you need to get into a room, there are roughly 13.15 ways to do so in total, and depending on your character build, you'll be able to choose between 2.7 and 8.3 ways to get in. They will all be blindingly obvious, but technically you have a choice, and that gets people all warm and tingly these days. The suit contraptions in the new Colossus offer even more limited choices than those in Prey. When you come to a dead end, you'll be faced with 3 very obvious options, and they will typically be right next to each other. You can use the stilts to climb higher, constrict your body to get through a small vent, or burst through a weak wall. These options don't offer up exciting alternate routes to mix up gameplay. They are simply the way forward in the same way that opening up any door with a keycard is the way forward. Imagine you have 3 different keycards on you and they all work. Just choose which one you want to use. Isn't choice great? There are so many things to do and you can play the entire game 3 times to see all the different ways to complete it. Unfortunately, you can't do a no suit upgrade playthrough, so you'll have to limit yourself to 3 runs. As you can probably tell at this point, I found the visual design of the levels to be a bit uninspired. That doesn't have to be a deal breaker. For example, one of my favourite ever games takes place on a tanker. Or just look at Neo, a great game from 2017 that has somewhat tedious levels. If the game is fun enough to play, I can easily look past visuals. The new Colossus is fun, but not good enough to make up for the lackluster story and level design. Of all the places to be let down with the game, I didn't expect the basic gameplay to be the real disappointment. So let's take a look at that. The new Colossus can be exhilarating. The guns feel and sound spectacular, so you'll often find yourself shooting Nazis with a huge smile on your face. Unfortunately, too much of the game is frustrating with some strange difficulty and control choices, and it commits the cardinal sin of shoving in stealth sections where they aren't required. Let's talk about the sexy subject first, difficulty. The new Colossus is pretty hard. There are 6 difficulty modes for your first playthrough, and a 7th, Mein Leben, is unlocked after completing the game. The 7th setting doesn't feel any tougher than the 6th, except that it has permadeath. Being the thorough, in-depth YouTuber that I am, I of course played this for about 5 minutes and then gave up. Nope, not for me. What's most surprising is that nearly all of the standard 6 settings offer a significant challenge. Only the Can I Play Daddy baby mode can be considered anywhere approaching easy, and even then I'd say it's only easy for experienced gamers. Anyone who's even vaguely casual will die a fair bit. This easy mode is not to be confused with an explorer mode like in Uncharted or Horizon. However, let's be honest, inexperienced gamers probably aren't watching videos like this one. Most people watching this will use difficulty options between 2 and 4, because, rightly or wrongly, our brains are programmed to ignore easy modes, especially ones called Can I Play Daddy and accompanied by a picture of BJ sucking a dummy, or pacifier for the Americans in the audience. It's worth noting that I played the new Colossus on PS4, and I'm fairly sure it's easier on PC with a mouse and keyboard, as most first-person shooters are. This tends to be especially true with fast shooters like this one and Doom. There are also issues switching between weapons on a controller which probably aren't as bad on PC. So, if most people would eventually find a difficulty setting they can handle, why does the difficulty bother me? Well, the first reason is pretty specific to me, so I'm separating it from other criticism of the game. Wolfenstein 3D was the first-person shooter I ever played. I got a hold of the shareware version that included the entire first episode for free. I think it came free with a magazine, but I can't remember. I played that shareware episode a lot. Starting on the lowest difficulty setting, I gradually worked my way up until I couldn't handle the challenge. Eventually I picked up the full game and once again I completely devoured it, playing on all the difficulty settings and using cheats for the settings that I couldn't otherwise complete. Strangely, playing on the hardest setting with the cheats helped me get a lot better at the game. I completed it with cheats and then went back to the start to play it without cheats. I expected to be terrible at the game having just played through without having to worry about health or ammo, but the intensity of the last few levels on the hardest setting somehow made me better overall, and I think I was able to complete the game on the hardest setting, or maybe the second hardest, I'm not 100% sure. The point of this little ramble is that I have fond memories of sucking at a genre of a game that I'd never played before and getting a hell of a lot better at it thanks to a Wolfenstein game. Kids in 2017 won't be able to have that experience. They probably shouldn't. When I was 10 years old, Wolfenstein was all large blocky sprites and my parents didn't care about what games I played. 25 years later, Wolfenstein's a little more graphic. I doubt many 10-year-olds are having their first ever FPS experience with Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. As society, we've decided to protect our kids from blood, violence and boobs and shunt them towards gambling and crippling debt instead. Getting back on track, The New Colossus is hard. You play the first half of the game with a maximum of 50% health instead of 100%. You can get your health above 50% if you overcharge, however this extra health counts down quickly and you'll be hard pressed to take advantage of it. The 50% health figure illustrates BJ's initial weakness until he gets his super body. However, it's unusual for games to be harder in the first half than the second. I don't mind the attempt to have BJ be weaker at the start, but your health can disappear in an instant. As I mentioned earlier, it's a bit odd that BJ goes from being unable to walk to being able to sprint around in a metal suit without a corresponding change to his health percentage. To me, it would have made much more sense to start at 50% for the level in the wheelchair, and then boost it up to 100% when you get Caroline's suit. The new body you get after being decapitated could boost your health to 200%, or give you other benefits such as making you run faster. None of this needs to make the game too easy. Neither does having health at 50% need to make it too hard. It's all in the numbers, of course. However, from my experience, keeping everything the same but having health at 100% once you're out of the wheelchair would have been an improvement. The low health and starting armour fits thematically with the story, but Machine Games then backs itself into a bit of a corner by having BJ go up against Frau Engel and her Nazi army right from the beginning. Without making the enemies weaker, which wouldn't fit thematically, you're obviously going to be having a tough time. I therefore find it surprising that the story didn't start off a little more modestly. There are plenty of ways BJ could have faced off against weaker enemies without it messing up the story. We know that Nazis have taken over America, and at least some of the US population is on board with that. We also know that the Nazis don't think too highly of Americans, especially the ones who can't speak German. BJ could start the game with reduced health, but he could be fighting against American soldiers recruited by the Nazis. The Americans would just be regular citizens who signed up to fight, but they wouldn't have any special training. The Nazis don't care about them all that much, so they shove them on the front line and then only officially recruit ones that prove themselves. I don't envision the Americans being fully fledged Nazis with official uniforms at this point. Not to avoid any political controversy, just because the Nazis believe they are better than the average Americans and don't want to admit them to the ranks until they've achieved something of note. This way you could keep BJ's reduced health and thematic consistency without the need to make the introduction strangely difficult. Plus you wouldn't need to spend so much time on the boring U-boat. I also don't understand the drastic difficulty spikes, most notably the courtroom sequence. This comes at about the midway point and is easily the hardest part of the game. I had to lower the difficulty from level 3 to level 2 and it was still tough. I put the difficulty level up again afterwards, but I hate fiddling around with difficulty levels during a playthrough. The courtroom also ends up being a dream sequence. You have to run around and clear out enemy after enemy, including quite a few in heavy armour, before finally triggering a cutscene with BJ's deceased mother. I can't think of a less satisfying way to end the hardest part of the game than to find out it was all a dream. And why is a dream sequence so damn difficult anyway? Shouldn't it be relatively easy? This could have been a power trip for BJ where he finds health and armour all over the place. It could even be suspiciously easy to tip off the player that it's all a dream. There's an excellent moment in the 2017 Giant Bomb Game of the Year discussion where they talk about this section. I can't for the life of me find the exact point where they mention this, so I'll paraphrase. Jeff Gersman suggests that perhaps the dream sequence is hard because it's BJ's mind punishing him the only way it knows how. It's a nice thought, but I'm tempted to go with Alex Navarro's reply, which is that the developers just got too far up their own arse with the difficulty. I can't put it much better than that. Finally, and this is definitely a pet peeve, but I hate it when dogs in games are disproportionately difficult. I died to dogs a lot in the new Colossus. I have to be honest, I don't ever like dying to dogs in games. They shouldn't be tougher than heavily armed Nazis in armour, even if the dogs are machines themselves. BJ is a death machine. He shouldn't die because a dog has mistaken him for a chew toy. I don't want to die to dogs in video games unless I'm playing as a cat, and even then I have questions. Even once you've found a difficulty setting you're happy with, or at least content with, the new Colossus still has issues with basic gameplay mechanics, because it forces players to wrestle with an unnecessary stealth versus action decision for many combat encounters. Stealth has been a part of most Wolfenstein games, so I wonder whether its inclusion here was part of a genuine desire to include that style of gameplay or just a misguided attempt to pay homage to those old games. The original Castle Wolfenstein, released back in the early 80s, was probably the first ever stealth game depending on your definition of the genre. You could hide dead bodies and pose as guards to get into new areas. Wolfenstein 3D then removed those elements to concentrate on all-out action. I'm a big fan of good stealth games. The first Metal Gear Solid, as opposed to the first Metal Gear game, I'm not that old, made me fall in love with the genre. However, it also helped kick off a resurgence that led to stealth elements being included where they weren't required. It became a back-of-the-box item for publishers to tick, much like open world and shitty cosmetics in loot boxes are nowadays. More often than not, these stealth inclusions are forced and unnecessary, especially in first-person shooters like, for example, Battlefield 1. When a non-stealth game tries to shove in stealth sections, there's usually one thing they have in common: a lack of actual stealth mechanics to play with. These games interpret stealth as simply the need to remain unseen by enemies by following a set path, as opposed to the need to use your intelligence to alter enemy movements and make your own path. I like to influence the world around me in stealth games, otherwise there's far too much waiting around and trial and error for my tastes. I also generally consider it a failure if I have to resort to all-out combat when I'm trying to be stealthy. I like to finish Hitman levels without being spotted, not running to an escape vehicle while being chased. I'm not saying I succeed all that often, but it's what I try to do. In the new Colossus, you can sneak up on enemies to get stealth kills from behind with your axe. You can also throw your axe, however you have a limited amount, so you'll need to go back and get the axe again afterwards. Once you find a weapon upgrade kit, you can convert your pistol to be a silenced pistol, which helps you pick off a few enemies from a distance. Not much of a distance, mind you, as the range is quite limited. That said, it's quite overpowered when you are in range, as even guards with helmets can be killed in one shot. With the silenced pistol, you can distract guards by shooting at walls. I guess the theory is that the guards will go and investigate the bullet hole in the wall. However, whenever I tried it, they would typically investigate where the bullet came from, which is fair enough. Oh, you can also peek around corners. And as for stealth mechanics, that's basically it. You can quietly kill enemies, and if you get lucky you might be able to distract them, but don't count on it. You likely won't get very far killing enemies with silent kills because guards spot the dead bodies of their comrades and quickly start shooting at you, as if they have their own version of detective vision to know where you are immediately. You can't hide the dead bodies because that would actually be a stealth mechanic. The level design doesn't lend itself to stealth. The typical combat encounter starts off funneling you through one particular path. During this time you can usually get in a few cheap stealth kills, but then there will be too many enemies and too few paths to keep to the non-functional shadows. Far too often I only had a maximum choice of 2 possible routes to get from one end to the other, and stealth killing one enemy only serves to attract the attention of others nearby. Worst of all, sneaking around is not fun. BJ can run fast and dual-wield machine guns. Why on earth would machine games encourage you to crawl around corners with a silenced pistol? I'm sure you can get good at stealth, but why on earth would you want to? None of this would be a problem if you could just ignore the stealth, but you're constantly encouraged to use it due to the commanders who sound the alarm within seconds of hearing a gunshot. Except for a few early stages, the commanders are nearly always at the far end of a combat section, and they are, apparently, telepathically linked to all other enemies in the area. Your radio tells you how close they are and in what direction, however it doesn't tell you what floor they're on. Once spotted, the circle fills up within a few seconds. I thought this short time period was a suspicious state that might let you avoid the alarm by going back into hiding. It's not. As far as I can tell, there's no way to stop the circle filling up, so you have about 2 seconds to kill the commander before the alarm sounds. Unless you're already close, this is unlikely to happen. The circle fills up even if the commander is more than 200 feet away and you've quickly killed the enemy who spotted you. It's like all the Nazis are a hive mind, and the second you're spotted by one of them, they all know where you are. Most of the sections with commanders end up playing out in the same way. You're granted a couple of easy stealth kills at the start, and you might be able to get a couple more if you're careful. If there are 2 commanders in the area, then you can probably kill one of them without attracting any attention. You'll then go for the second commander, but by this point one of their dead bodies will likely be spotted and your cover will be blown. You'll then run past all the other enemies because there's no point wasting ammo on the normal guards while more are spawning in. You'll kill the second commander and then go back to finish off the rest. It's in no way a satisfying stealth experience because you've ended up all guns blazing anyway. And it's not a satisfying shooting experience because you had to start off stealthily and run past loads of enemies you should have been shooting. All this leads me to believe you're not supposed to play the new Colossus stealthily. After 2 playthroughs I'm convinced of that. In addition to the lack of stealth mechanics, you only have one gun that can be used for stealth takedowns, and that's only after you've upgraded the pistol. The machine gun can also be upgraded with a suppressor, however I found that still attracted attention. The rest of the time you want to be dual wielding either the assault rifle or the automatic machine gun. You also get heavy weaponry such as laser guns, although you can't dual wield these. Credit has to go to the shockhammer, an automatic shotgun, which is not only one of the most satisfying shotguns I've used in a while, it's one of the most satisfying weapons full stop. Unfortunately, even the run and gun gameplay isn't as fun as it should be due to a couple of basic control issues that could easily be fixed. The biggest issue is the baffling decision to make health, ammo and armour pickups require the player to hammer a button to pick them up. You're always going to want the ammo because it only picks up the amount you need, so there's no reason not to make this an automatic pickup as soon as you run over it. Some small pieces of armour left behind by enemies do get picked up on contact. However, it's so inconsistent that you'll end up hammering the pickup button anyway just to make sure. There might be the odd occasion when you don't want to collect a large piece of armour because it will take you up to the cap, but that's rare. The requirement to manually pick up items is nearly entirely because of the health overcharge mechanic. The overcharge mechanic is another design choice that is contrary to the idea of stealth. It's designed to make players go all out because having your health tick down isn't a good motivator to stay in the shadows. Depending on where you are in the campaign, you'll have a health cap of either 50 or 100. You can increase your health to 200, however it will immediately start ticking down to the cap. Therefore, in theory, you want to avoid going into overcharge until just before or during a combat encounter. This is why the entire pickup system is in place, to give players the ability to choose when they collect health items, and it's a complete waste of time. It's far too finicky to pick and choose which items you'll collect. Trying to select exactly what armour, ammo and health items you want at any given time means you'll spend more time pixel hunting than you will shooting. A lot of the gear is tricky to spot, so you'll either constantly press the button or press it in response to the indicator appearing on the screen. If you're sprinting, there's a good chance you won't even pick it up, and it's hard to spot when you've successfully got it because there's only a quick notification in the bottom left hand corner that's easy to miss. I got into the habit of sprinting backwards and forwards over gear 2 or 3 times and just hoping I managed to collect it. More often than not I did, but occasionally I would still have not picked up the desired item, and at that point I would usually give up. There's a similar problem with the collectibles. I hesitate to say that I found many collectibles. Found isn't really the right word. What happened was I would occasionally move close enough to random collectibles that an indicator would appear on screen encouraging me to pick it up. Then I'd press square and something that I'd never even seen would be added to my inventory. The Enigma cards left behind by the commanders are even worse. For some reason these cards are stubbornly difficult to pick up. I would often try to pick up the Enigma codes during a gunfight because I was collecting armour and ammo anyway. However, I nearly always had to go back and get these cards after everyone else was dead. Either that or I would insist on hammering square until I did have it, even if I was taking loads of damage in the process. There seems to be a disconnect between being close enough to the Enigma cards to pick them up and actually being able to prize them from the stubborn dead hands of the commanders. Between ammo, armour and health packs and collectible items in the environment, I spent an insane amount of time pressing the square button when all I wanted to do was shoot Nazis. Most of these problems can be tracked back to the decision to make the collection of medpacks optional because of the overcharge mechanic. However, I would have sacrificed this choice to give my poor square button a rest. To be clear, this was a problem in the New Order as well, however it's a bigger problem here due to the increased difficulty of the new Colossus, and the unfortunate fact that it's being released after 2016's Doom. In Doom you automatically collected all armour, health packs and ammo on contact, and combat was magical as a result. I loved Doom. It was insanely fast and frantic and pretty much the perfect modernisation of a 90s shooter. The new Colossus has a different setting to Doom obviously, but the gunplay has a lot in common, or at least it should. BJ is fast, perhaps not as fast as Doom Guy, but he's faster than your typical FPS protagonist. I wanted to use that speed to my advantage, not spend half the time with my hand awkwardly trying to move between the right analog stick and the square button. This isn't something that comes over particularly well in the video footage, but I assure you, it's really annoying. Oh, and did I mention that the button to pick up items is the same button to reload? On the plus side, my guns always had bullets in them. On the negative side, I spent a lot of time taking damage during unnecessary reloads. Doom would put you in huge open spaces and let you go wild. The new Colossus constantly moves you through narrow corridors so BJ can rarely stretch whatever legs happen to be attached to his body at the time. The other annoying aspect with the controls is the weapon wheel that you use to switch weapons and move from holding a single weapon to dual wielding. In the New Order you did this by selecting a weapon on the wheel, including whether you want to dual wield or just hold one gun. In the new Colossus you can now dual wield different weapon types, so you can hold a pistol in one hand and a machine gun in the other. This comes in use occasionally if you're running low on ammo, but for the most part it feels odd to have weapons firing at different rates in different hands. I was nearly always dual wielding weapons except for when I was using the silenced pistol for the stealth gameplay. Going from one weapon to dual wielding the same weapon type is easy, you just press up. It's a little more cumbersome to move from one weapon to dual wielding a different type of weapon. You bring up the weapon wheel, change the weapon to the one you want and then press up on the D-pad or whatever the keyboard equivalent is. Even this relatively basic action can be a problem in the heat of battle. If you're moving from a silenced pistol to dual wielding machine guns, then there's a good chance you are spotted and are in a bit of a rush. Opening the weapon wheel doesn't slow down time like it does in Doom. It's easy to select the wrong weapon if you move the analog stick slightly before closing the wheel. Finally, even if you do successfully initiate the correct weapon change, that weapon change will be cancelled if you sprint too soon after closing the weapon wheel. Remember, this is all happening in the heat of the moment with potentially quite a few enemies around you while you have low health, and a commander to kill before he calls in reinforcements. In theory it's all quite straightforward. In practice it's tough to pull off smoothly. Even a basic change such as moving from dual wielding shotguns to dual wielding machine guns can be a pain. If you have a shotgun equipped, you can either call up the weapon wheel to change the gun in your right hand and then move over to change the gun in your left hand separately, which by the way is fiddly as hell, or you can change the right hand weapon, then go back to just a single gun and then select your wield again. None of these options are better than the weapon wheel from the New Order, which was abandoned so that we could mix and match weapon types with dual wielding. I would happily sacrifice that ability to switch between weapons more easily. All those Enigma cards you collect serve a purpose. You can use these cards to complete a short decryption minigame, which is terribly explained, and then go back to previous levels to kill Uber commanders. Given that sections with commanders who set off alarms was generally my least favourite content from the entire game, you can probably imagine I didn't get a lot out of this. I appreciate the effort to provide some extra content, but you'd be better off just running through the campaign again on a higher or lower difficulty setting. This video has been overwhelmingly negative, so to be clear, the new Colossus is occasionally a lot of fun. When you're let loose to go nuts and mow down Nazis with dual machine guns or melt machines with a laser, the game brings back the same highs I experienced when playing Doom in 2016. The New Order was a great soft reboot of the infamous shooter series, but it left plenty of room for improvements in the inevitable sequel. The sequel is now here, but the improvements never happened. The new Colossus looks better, but it doesn't feel better. The story and level design are both notably worse, and the slightly higher difficulty brings additional emphasis to the unnecessary stealth additions that the game will be better off removing entirely. The Season Pass is going to be split into 3 different characters who each utilise different playstyles which build off the upgrade suit in more interesting ways than the main game does. You get to play a sample of each for free. The first piece of content has already been released and it features a former football star who can charge through walls and stagger enemies. You'd think this would mean there's no stealth this time around, but no such luck. This seems especially strange given that one of the other DLC characters has a stealth focus, and the constrictor suit to crawl into small gaps. I probably had more fun with the DLC than I did with much of the main story, however it's short and the story isn't all that interesting. Assuming the rest of the DLC follows a similar vibe, it isn't worth the full $40 asking price. The new Colossus drops a couple of big clues for the third game. Spesh's cube that Set became obsessed with is linked to a potential anti-gravity capability. It would be great if BJ gets to use an anti-grav weapon that could offer up some fun and different combat options. However, I suspect the anti-gravity device will be more like a large machine that is activated and then used in a cutscene. Mecha Hitler will presumably make an appearance, but I'm holding out hope that it's more than just Hitler in a massive robot suit. We've seen plenty of enemies in robot suits already. Making one even bigger with Hitler in it wouldn't be all that special. The new Colossus makes a number of references to aliens. The cube itself is likely alien technology. Spesh was a big believer in aliens and we had a level set in Roswell. Perhaps the Nazis could figure out how to harness the full power of this alien tech to make Hitler into a superhuman. Anything that's more than just literally Hitler in a robot suit would be welcome. I wish I'd enjoyed the new Colossus a lot more than I did. Not just because I always want to enjoy games, but because I want to recommend solid single player experiences in a time when they are becoming increasingly rare. As a publisher, Bethesda does at least seem to be trying. It just so happens I haven't enjoyed a lot of their recent output. Prey, Fallout 4 and Wolfenstein 2 were all mediocre. The Evil Within 2 was damn good and Doom was bloody brilliant. I haven't played Dishonored 2 yet, but hopefully I'll enjoy it. They seem to have a 50% success rate with me, but every game has its passionate admirers. Before playing the new Colossus, I obviously had no idea how the story would play out. As discussed, I ended up being disappointed by it. However, the story wasn't the part of the new Colossus that I was most excited for. That was the gunplay. The New Order felt damn fun to play. With a few lessons learned from Doom, the new Colossus could have been phenomenal. It's not. If anything, it's gone backwards from the New Order. I certainly can't see any improvements outside of the graphics. The New Order was a solid 4 out of 5 shooter in 2014. 3 years later and 4 years into this console generation, I expected more. I know it won't sound like it, but I'm actually trying to avoid comparisons to Doom, but I just can't help it. It's unbelievable that the new Colossus and Doom were made on the same engine. In addition to far better shooting, Doom had competent platforming that let you grab hold of edges and haul yourself up. BJ struggles to get himself out of aggressively deep puddles. If you haven't played Doom 2016 yet, play that instead. If you've already played Doom 2016, play it again in arcade mode.
Also, for the love of God, machine games, please include a chapter select. The New Order had one, but for some reason it's been removed in the new Colossus. I'm sure there's some poor YouTuber out there who had problems with the audio and footage they recorded and needed to replay the entire game just to capture a short clip of a scene they wanted to show in their video. Playing the game 3 times is just a little too much.
This video ended up being quite negative, but the good news is that the next couple should have more positive vibes. Hellblade is up next and I can already tell you that I really liked that game. After that it's probably my Fallout 2 retrospective and I'm pretty sure I still like Fallout 2 a lot. I'm also having a lot of fun streaming on Twitch, so if you need to hear happy comments about video games then pop along and don't ask me about Doki Doki Literature Club. I might have finished playing Yakuza 0 by the time you watch this, but the next few games I've got lined up should be a lot of fun. The tentative schedule has Danganronpa 3 next, although I need to see if I can make that work on a stream. There's a lot of reading, but the Danganronpa games are cool and I'd like to stream it. I'll probably stream Yakuza Kiwami as well, and after that I'll get stuck into 2018 releases. Thanks for watching to the end of the video. Please consider subscribing and hitting the like button if you want to see the next videos. I still read all the comments, so let me know what you thought of the video and the game itself. It's really difficult to reply to all the YouTube comments as the mobile app is terrible. I'm much better at replying to questions on Twitter and Twitch, and there should be links to those accounts on screen and in the description. Maybe get in touch through one of those if I don't respond on YouTube. Okay, until next time, cheers.
Oh, and the music that plays at the end is absolutely terrible.